feds got addresses of all who rioted at Trump's inauguration. Here's what they're doing with them. It's now being reported that the United States Justice Department is not standing down against the hate group known as Antifa. The DOJ is actively seeking 1.3 million IP addresses that have visited a Trump-resistance site. The search warrant is part of an ongoing investigation into Inauguration Day 2017 rioting which caused billions of dollars in damages throughout the nation. Dream Host, who hosts Disrupt20.org, has vowed to fight the DOJ's demand that the web host release records of its 1.3 million visitors' IP addresses. The site that helped organize the January 20th unlawful and destructive protests is, of course, challenging the warrant it was served by branding it an unfocused search, and going as far as declaring that it is a clear abuse of government authority. Keep in mind all these people kept quiet while former President Barack Hussein Obama weaponized the IRS and used it to attack his enemies in the Tea Party. Although the leftists in the internet business are trying to paint this as a crackdown on all 1.3 million people who merely just clicked on the site, it's not. It's just a way to find out who caused all the damage on January 20th so they can be brought to justice so another episode like this can be prevented the next time the American left doesn't like who won the American presidency. The Guardian reports. More than 200 protesters were arrested on Friday as police used pepper spray and stun grenades to suppress a series of small, violent confrontations before and after Donald Trump was sworn in as the 45th President of the United States. Thousands of protesters from numerous groups descended on Washington, D.C. for mostly peaceful protest throughout Inauguration Day, in a sign of the dissent and discord Trump's divisive presidential campaign produced. Shortly after Trump was sworn in, violent protests broke out in the downtown area close to the north lawn of the White House and just blocks from the pathway of the inaugural parade. A few dozen protesters, clad in black, threw projectiles at police and barricaded the road with newspaper kiosks and bins, which they later set fire to. The group were quickly surrounded by police in riot gear who used sting ball grenades and pepper spray, police said, after a black limousine was set on fire. Before the swearing-in ceremony took place, activists from the anarchist group known as the Black Bloc smashed storefront windows and cars as they clashed with police. Officers in riot gear had again responded with pepper spray and sting ball grenades, according to police, as the breakaway protesters were overwhelmed with force less than 2 miles from the U.S. Capitol. The group of about 200 people, many wearing black hoodies and masks, were eventually contained in a police cordon as they chanted, "This is what a police state looks like and you're protecting fascists." But live streaming from inside the cordon, known as a police kettle, revealed that journalists and legal observers were also being held inside. By Friday evening, some members of this first group had filed a class action lawsuit against the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, claiming that they had suffered physical and emotional injury, as well as loss of liberty during the episode. Most of the masked protesters declined to be interviewed or named, but one man who refused to give his name said their purpose was to reject the system of economic exploitation called capitalism. "It's not just about no order," he said. "It's about human freedom and an economy that's run by the people." A spokesman for the D.C. Metropolitan Police said law enforcement had arrested 217 people by Friday evening while 6 officers suffered minor injuries, including 3 officers suffering head traumas after being struck by projectiles. The spokesman also denied that officers had deployed tear gas on protesters, despite media reports suggesting otherwise. "We expected this kind of thing from this kind of group, and they're going to be held accountable," said Peter Newsham, the interim chief of police, on MSNBC. At a press conference on Friday evening, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser acknowledged the hundreds and hundreds of protesters who had made their voices heard through non-violent acts of protest. But added, "Unfortunately, a small group of people have engaged in vandalism as well as violence against our law enforcement officers. This type of destruction and this type of violence against people in Washington, D.C. will not be tolerated." Another group of activists had attempted earlier to shut down a number of the security points allowing access to the public viewing area of the inauguration on the National Mall on Friday morning. The small groups at these checkpoints, organized by a group named Disrupt J20, linked arms as some members were led away by police wearing body armor. The organization claimed on social media that they had temporarily shut down a number of the dozen checkpoints around the mall, with a group of Black Lives Matter protesters reportedly closing access at one location for over an hour. Many protesters gained access to the public viewing area on the mall, many chanting "Not My President" and holding signs with slogans including "Can we impeach him today?" and "Fascist." Some protesters were also present along the route of the parade later in the day. As the Chief Justice, John Roberts, rose to administer the oath of office for the incoming president, 6 protesters, seated on the lawn just in front of the steps to the Capitol, tore off their coats, jumped onto their chairs and began chanting. "A nation united can never be divided," they said. Together the letters on their shirts spelled, "Resist." Around them, supporters shouted and called for them to leave. A man shook their chairs until one of the protesters fell. Eventually, security arrived and they were removed from the event. James Ebersole, a protester who had come to Washington from Virginia, said he had decided to come to D.C. in order to voice dissent, to say that this is not okay. "I think it's unifying people," he said of the resistance to Trump's election, while brandishing a sign that read "Misogyny is a danger to society." "It's a call to action, a wake-up call, and it unites us against this threat." Barbara McQueenie had never attended an inauguration before, but she felt compelled to fly out from St. Augustine, Florida, to protest outside the barricades lining the National Mall. "I live in an area where there's a lot of Trump supporters and I'm crushed," she said. "We need hope." McQueenie, who is retired, did not engage in much shouting. She instead stood quietly at the center of a protest lifting a homemade poster with the letters USSR spelling out United States Satellite of Russia. "Everyone knows they were involved," she said of Vladimir Putin's government, "but everyone is just going forward like it's business as usual." As the sun began to set and the parade continued into the evening, some activists camped nearly 12 hours on the streets. Rama Kudemi, who organized one of the activities associated with Disrupt J20 Collective, accused the president of campaigning on a platform of racism, bigotry and hate. "We are taking a stand to say that we are against this. Our actions today made that very clear," said Kudemi, a board member of the Washington Peace Center, a grassroots organization centered on social justice. Kudemi oversaw a demonstration that brought together about 100 people to represent those she said had been harassed and threatened by Trump and his supporters, namely Muslims, immigrants and Jewish communities. They were one of the groups who attempted to shut down an entrance checkpoint earlier in the day. In San Francisco, protesters took over the pedestrian pathways of the iconic Golden Gate Bridge in an effort to form a human chain on Friday afternoon. The action, which did not block vehicle traffic, attracted thousands of people, who held hands as part of a peaceful demonstration. At the San Francisco headquarters of Uber, activists shut down the office building, leading to roughly 16 arrests. The tech company's CEO recently joined Trump's Strategic and Policy Forum. Demonstrators linked arms across the Golden Gate Bridge during a peaceful demonstration against the inauguration of Donald Trump. Photograph, Stephen Lamb, Reuters. Demonstrators also assembled outside Trump Tower in New York City where 7 people, including 2 New York City councilmen, were arrested. The crowd assembled late Friday morning and sat in the road, attempting to stop traffic. Hundreds of protesters also marched later in the evening, arriving at Trump's 40 Wall Street property in the heart of the city's financial district. Hundreds of thousands of protesters are expected to descend on Washington for a women's march that is scheduled for Saturday, with similar events organized in cities around the country. Just because you're behind the computer screen shouldn't mean that you have the right to total anonymity. The American people are largely polite and amicable. Go anywhere, down to the corner store or to the mall, people usually hold the doors open for each other and are polite in every way possible, until they log on to social media. Just ask any of us who are politically active. We get attacked on a daily basis from so-called bots and new accounts, just because they disagree with our politics. Thank you for watching this video. What do you think about this? Share this on Facebook and Twitter along with your comments.